Mr. Chair, we are live. You may start the meeting.
Okay. I suppose that there's chair's remarks, and I think my main chair's remarks is that when I sent out the watershed assessment document just now, I forgot to include ticks and Lyme disease, and I'm on antibiotic treatment right now for a black-legged tick that was on my arm yesterday. So that's something to think of.
Yesterday.
And yeah, so we'll see how this this remote process goes. I've had an aversion to telephones since 1957, and I spent many decades being glad that computers hadn't introduced the video phones that everybody was talking about back then. But it's
caught up with you.
It's now gone down the drain, so we'll have to live in the drain.
Great, thank you. We can move on to number 2 on the agenda, the approval of the agenda. There is no supplemental. We'll need a mover and a seconder, and just for ease of the meeting, instead of asking for all those in favor, well, Fred, if you want to just ask if there are any opposed, that'll be the easier way to keep track. So if I could get a mover and seconder for the approval of the agenda. Sorry, was that Alvin?
Yes.
No, Sean.
Sean, okay. Okay, so I have Alvin moving and Sean seconding.
All right.
And are there any additions to the agenda? Hearing none, Mr. Chair, you can call the question.
Are there any opposed? We've never had anybody opposed to anything.
Hearing none, so we can move on to number 3, declarations of conflict of interest. Hearing none.
Right.
We can move on to the request for approval electronic meeting procedures, and that report is from myself, and you'll find it on page 3 of your agenda package if you're following along in the agenda. Sorry, I got to catch up on my slides here. So again, this report is just to outline how this electronic meeting will work and the procedures that are involved. So again, I am the only individual present. Everyone else is joining electronically by video or by phone. Again, I would remind you to mute yourself when you're not speaking, just to avoid some background noise and feedback. When you unmute to speak, please identify who you are so that we can properly record who is speaking. Say your name and wait for the chair to acknowledge you to proceed. And just a reminder again that this meeting is being broadcast through YouTube Live and is being recorded. So it is a request for the Fish and Wildlife Committee to approve the electronic meeting procedures as outlined in this report. And again, we'll need a mover and a seconder.
We need a mover and a seconder.
Larry Smith, move.
Thank you, Larry. And a seconder?
Malcolm will do that.
Malcolm? Are there any questions on the procedures for the meeting? Hearing none, Mr. Chair, thank you. Hearing none, carried. Okay. Bear with me for a second. I need to switch slide decks. We'll bring up our staff update. So I'd like to first start the slide deck with a congratulations to our chair and Alita on the Glen Davis Conservation Leadership Award. So congratulations on that accomplishment. And perhaps, Fred, you'd like to take a moment just to tell us a little bit about it and the work that got you recognized.
Yeah, well, this is a prize for not having figured out how to have a net income and doing a whole lot of things and trying to cooperate with a whole lot of organizations and not cooperating with a bunch of them, although South Nation is one of the exceptions, and going all over the country catching stuff and accumulating 20 cubic meters of specimens and not really knowing what to do with them. So
I'll just put that in a nutshell. The Glen Davis was a philanthropist who supported people working in conservation, particularly people who were not, their work wasn't funded. And he died tragically in 2017. I think he was killed.
No, 2007.
2007. We really.
It was 10 years later that they started the project.
Okay. So we were nominated by 15 people, and there were 45 candidates, and it was unanimous that we were chosen. I think it's because we were most needy.
Well, congratulations. You are also the first couple to win the award. So job well done. Do we have Kat?
Okay, yeah, sorry. Hi, everyone. It's Kat Watson here. So we are currently working on 2 catchment studies within the city of Ottawa. Oh, here, I'll turn my camera on too. So we're working on 2 catchment studies within the city of Ottawa, supported through the Eastern Ontario Water Resources Program. And these studies are an important part of the sub-watershed planning process at the city. And we work closely with them to ensure that they're receiving the data they need to effectively make planning-related decisions in these catchments. So we're just wrapping up the final report for the North Castor River catchment. And this report presents findings collected from field investigations in 2018 and 2019, aimed at better understanding water quality, water quantity, and habitat features within the catchment. And it also provides recommendations for restoration and protection within the catchment. And the second study is on the South Bearbrook catchment, which will involve field investigations in 2020 and 2021. And we just recently began those field investigations, including the deployment of some long-term water quality sensors and some grab samples taken to submit to the City of Ottawa lab.
Okay, and I'll
hello everyone. Oh, sorry.
I'll just say that Alita and I have been talking with the Eco East group, which is what used to be Dump the Dump Now, and we've taken on looking for the mussels in the Bearbrook and Castor drainages in order to have a baseline in case there's leakage from the Boundary Road dump. That to find out that they're there, but the excuse is to see if have a baseline in case there's leakage of toxins from the dump when it's put in, if it's put in.
Okay, Ryan.
Good afternoon, everyone. Hope you could hear me all right. I'm hiding out here at the office, so I'm not at home today. But so for 2020, headwater drainage features, we're looking at the South Bearbrook catchment. And well, actually, I guess we should say we weren't actually able to fulfill that commitment this year due to COVID-19. Brett and I, we started out trying to get some of these sites sampled, but it just proved to be quite difficult to keep, apart for 6 feet, 2 meters, and try and do these measurements, as well as trying to take a floodplain measurement of some of these sites was just merely impossible, even with one person. So we're going to have to hold off, continue again next year, as there's another component to doing a spring study on the HDFs. However, I think we'd probably lose a lot of these the HDFs in the tall grass, so we probably wouldn't get very much good data. So, like I said, we'll be holding off for 2021 to meet that. Thank you.
Naomi?
Good afternoon, everyone. This is an update on the Vernal Pool project. We constructed 10 ponds, 5 at 2 sites on properties that South Nation owns. We have, this spring, I was able to install some recording devices because with the COVID restrictions in place, it made it hard to kind of plan to get out and do monitoring. We were loaned the devices from Environment and Climate Change Canada, and they're the funders of the program, and they had these devices available. I'll be going to pick them up in the next couple of weeks, and hopefully we'll have some data on it that we can provide to Environment and Climate Change Canada. And this week we'll also have a live program, an education program that we're going to be airing on I think it's on our South Nation YouTube channel that's talking about vernal ponds.
Yes, for those that wish to tune in, 1 o'clock live on South Nation's YouTube is where you'll find that one.
What day is that?
This Thursday. So it's our Home at Nature series. So every Thursday at 1 o'clock, we broadcast live from our YouTube channel.
And another thing is about the chorus. These ponds were built for chorus frogs, and it was a really difficult spring for listening for chorus frogs because we had this long cool period from the early in April until late in May, and it was very difficult to know when you should go out and listen for chorus frogs.
That's right. Hopefully those little units that we put out, we're able to catch something in terms of recording the songs that they make. Another thing that I was up to this spring, Brent and I were able to go out to a new property that South Nation acquired. It's the Velma property out near Moose Creek, and Brent was doing the bird surveys and I was taking care of the vegetation. And a very nice site, has lots of butternuts and quite a diversity of different plants and that sort of thing. It was really nice. There was actually 3 different species of violets there. We were seeing lots of different things there. So doing inventories on South Nation properties is one of some of the data that we acquire so that we have background information. It's also a requirement under the Ontario Heritage Trust. They want to have inventories of all the species that are on these properties. And we keep these documents in the property files so that staff have access to this information that we compile for each of our properties.
What is the name of that property again?
The Velma property.
Velma, okay.
Velma, yep.
Larry,
good afternoon.
Naomi.
Did you have a question?
Yes, question. What's the property number of the Velma property, Naomi?
The compartment number?
Yes.
Oh, that I don't know. It's on 6th Road. It's actually right across the street from Moose Creek Cement.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Brent Harbers. Just an update on our constructed grasslands. So we're actually in the 5th and final year of monitoring these grasslands that SNC built at 2 of our properties and a 3rd at the Upper Canada Migratory Bird Sanctuary. So to refresh your memory, these were built with funding from a developer who put up a solar farm in species at risk habitats. So as an offset, the Ministry of Natural Resources allowed them to build these grasslands with our help. So this 5th and final year, so far at these sites over the 5 years, we've had 62 different bird species using the sites in their outside, around and adjacent sites. And we have bobolink at all 3 sites on a consistent basis now. So they, in terms of attracting the species at risk that we were after, they were successful.
Is there going to be monitoring? What's the plan for monitoring after this 5th year?
Yeah, good question. So under the permit to undertake that work from the MNRF, the requirement is only for 5 years of monitoring. And we present that in a report to the MNRF at the end of each season. After the 5 years, it's now up to SNC. If we continue to monitor these sites, imagine we'll be back to them, being as 2 of them are SNC properties, so they'll be monitored on a more casual basis.
And are you going to make sure that woody plants don't move in and occlude the grassland?
Yeah, so another good comment or question. The work was done on these each of the 5 years since they were built. Mowing was done the past 2 years in order to keep the woody vegetation from coming back and discourage the regrowth. But the permit for these sites is for 20 years to remain. But I believe and if Michelle's there, she can correct me if I'm wrong, I believe the agreement is only for 5 years of management, and then the properties have to remain as grassland state for 20 years.
Yeah, so I'll just add in quickly, we have to mow it, we put it in the budget with the developer to mow every 3 years, up to the 20-year mark.
Okay, good.
Okay, so this next slide is just an example of how SNC is involved in sustainable development through a little bit different of a process through our planning and approvals process. So we actually are partners with a lot of our municipalities on development review. So in this particular case, the township required a developer who was building a large subdivision at this site to undertake an EIS, so an environmental impact statement report. So the consultant was hired, they completed this EIS, and then at the township's request, we would review it and make sure it was done appropriately and the mitigations for this development are applied appropriately. So for this specific one, you can see in the before the review map, this developer was nice and put a 15-meter buffer along the water course on the stream, or along the water course on the site. But what they failed to do is keep the stormwater management pond outside of that buffer. So they wanted to put it right up next to the creek, which is kind of a no-no in terms of best management for sustainable development. So we reviewed, provide comments, asked them to remove that stormwater pond from that buffer to the creek, and we had it put in a more sustainable location where the impacts would be less. And also through this process, we were able to encourage the developer to plant vegetation along this buffer, which they are obliging to do. So we will have a nice vegetated buffer along this stream. So development, which isn't inevitable here, it is in an urban boundary, which is going to go on, but done in a more sustainable way.
Good afternoon. This is Sandra Mancini, and I am just presenting the one way that we are improving our flood forecasting and warning for to provide more tools to our municipalities. In this case, we can see in the map that's Clarence Rockland along the shoreline of the Ottawa River. So as you know, there was a flood in 2017 and another flood in 2019. So that give us the opportunity to collect data on that flooding areas. With the data, what we did is we delineate this line that you can see in the map, the yellow line, and that gives an idea of the flooding area, what we call risk area, after the 2017 flood. So this line is provided to the municipalities, and we also provide the municipalities the listing with the names and the lots and addresses of all these houses in the floodplain. That gives the emergency manager and the municipality the opportunity to approach those landowners before there is a flood and give them a warning. Regarding flood forecasting and warning, spring freshet is almost over, almost in the South Nation watershed. Our flood forecasting and warning program covers three streams: the Lower Ottawa River, The spring freshet just ended. The water levels are between normal range at this time of the year. The South Nation watershed, the same thing. We don't have any statements in effect right now. Water levels are between normal range. And finally, the San Lawrence River, which is still in a flood watch. The Lake Ontario is still high and is on track to peak, but very well under the levels from 2017 and 2019. So at this time, they are is not expecting such a flooding as we had in 2017 and 2019 in the San Lawrence shoreline.
Just a quick update on the tree planting side of things. So we have wrapped up our tree planting season this year. A very successful year. We planted over 140,000 trees. This year we had staff crews helping out on some of the smaller planting sites that were more economical to do in-house instead of through our contract planter. So a shout out to much of the stewardship team who helped put some trees in the ground on a lot of the sites this spring. We also, of course, help out United Counties of Prescott and Russell at the La Rose Forest. And we also planted, of course, private lands across our jurisdiction with several landowners through the 50 Million Tree Program. We had great sales through our over-the-counter program this year. We, of course, with COVID-19, did things a little bit differently. We had scheduled pickup times that actually worked very well and is something we'll continue in the future. So another successful tree planting season completed with the necessary precautions in place to be able to do it in these times. And also on the tree side of things, you may recall last year we started with a municipal tree giveaway. In partnership with our member municipalities. This is offering free tree seedlings to residents within our member municipalities. Again, we normally would do these at held events in the municipality or mass pickup locations. Of course, this year with the gathering restrictions, we had to take a different approach. So we worked with our municipalities and we pre-registered interested landowners. We were able to provide trees to about 150 households per municipality. We use an online process for residents to sign up for tree seedlings, gave them an opportunity to pick their preferred species, and we stretched the limit, gave out as many as we could to as many households as we could, and they were able to either choose between a curbside pickup or with some of our municipalities, their staff actually did the deliveries on our behalf. So excellent partnership. As of last weekend when we wrapped up in Clarence Rockland, we have provided just over 17,000 seedlings to residents in partnership with our municipalities this year. So again, we had to take a bit of a different approach with COVID-19, but we're still able to deliver that program successfully. Brian, you're muted still.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
All right. So even though for a good bit our parks were closed, Works Department and myself, we were going out there weekly, and we were still doing maintenance. There was still garbage to be picked up, trees to be cut, branches to be picked up, that sort of thing. The good news is now that all our parks and conservation areas are open. Boat launches are all up, ready to go. Docks are ready to go. The only thing is privies are closed right now, as well as the structures and play structures. So those are still off limits, but we're having record numbers of people coming out and enjoying the parks right now because, well, they're beautiful parks and they're enjoying the beautiful weather we're having right now.
Hi, it's Michelle Kavanaugh here. So to go along with what Ryan just said in terms of record numbers, this graph shows the usage at some of our parks for the month of April. So you can see the yellow bars are for 2020, and obviously you can see the numbers are way up there. So people are definitely getting out, using those conservation areas, spending time outdoors, and doing so safely. We haven't had any issues reported from that end of things. And also just to note, these numbers, they are very high for this time of year, but they're still within kind of the numbers we see at the peak of the season. So nothing where we have to start being concerned about how many people are in these parks. The parks, they have enough space. There's enough room for people to visit these parks safely. So we're very happy to see this type of usage.
That looks awesome.
Yeah.
There's the bar, which is the control bar for video and audio and stuff, covers over an important part of each of the slides, and I'm finding it kind of frustrating, and I'm not sure that it can be moved.
I think if you click kind of outside of the video area, you might be able to turn it off from your end.
There we go. Wonderful. How do I get it back again?
Just move your mouse over the screen again and it'll pop back up.
Oh, okay, good. Cool. Thank you. Wonderful.
You're welcome.
Got it.
And has anybody seen concentrations of people that were, you know, being too crowded like they do in Toronto?
At our parks, we haven't had reports of that yet. Everyone's been pretty good. I mean, you obviously have the families going out, but we haven't had big groupings together where there's been concern. So people have been really respectful, really good so far. So we've had some vandalism, especially at our Finley Creek Boardwalk in Ottawa. There's been some vandalism there. I mean, we have vandalism there anyway, but I don't know whether it's just the extra time it was closed, just with signs and that sort of thing. So, but we've been checking on it and fixing stuff up and keeping the maintenance going, like Ryan said. So,
if I may, the one spot that I've seen a lot of people was during the walleye season, and where they're fishing off the bridge in the Chesterville Dam. That was just the one spot, because the walleye were there right after the season opened, and it was full of people there.
So another bit of exciting news is we have a new property in Augusta. This is going to be a new conservation area. We received it from the township. The township's transferring it over to SNC. It's right on the South Nation River, which is excellent. So it'll be future river access point there. We did receive some federal funding to be able to turn it into a conservation area. So that's going to involve things like the parking and access, the dock, all that sort of work. So very exciting, and there'll be work that'll start happening on that property in the next little while. So there's going to be if it isn't there already, there will be a sign that will be posted just to let people know that it's coming. So.
Yeah, that's a stretch of the river that's sort of understudied.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. And it'll be our furthest upstream access point in terms of our properties. So yeah. it'll be nice to be able to get in there.
Great, thank you. And just a correction that Carl kindly reminded me of, the Nature at Home series, I said broadcasted live on YouTube. It's actually broadcast live on our Facebook page. So Facebook, not YouTube, Thursdays at 1 o'clock.
Okay, good. Thank you.
You're welcome. A second to swap slide decks again. Okay, so that, Mr. Chair, brings us to item 6 on the agenda, and I also wanted to note that we do have Doug and Abraham joining us, and I failed to roll call at the beginning, so just before we get into community engagement, I just will go through who we have on the line so that everyone kind of is aware of who's there. We have Malcolm Clark, Bruce Clark, Alvin Clough Clybourne, Doug Kluver, Ed Fields, Abraham Francis, Alita Carstead, Sean Landrio, Kirk Meidel, Fred Schuler, Larry Smith, Bill Smurl, and Doug Thompson, as well as staff from South Nation.
So that's a nice full meeting.
Yes. Perfect. We're ready to go on to number 6, Mr. Chair, community engagement. If members have anything they would like to share on the community engagement side of things with the group.
We've been sort of holed up here. I don't think we've actually stepped into the South Nation drainage.
Yes, it's been pretty quiet everywhere for community engagement. So if there's nothing to add, we can move on to agenda item number 7.
Hang on, Rhonda. Abraham has his hand raised.
Oh, sorry, Mr. Abraham. If you might be muted, you might have to unmute yourself first.
Oh, I did.
Okay, perfect.
I'm familiar with Teams. So I just wanted to update you on the activities that we've been engaged in since COVID-19 began. We've canceled a lot of our community engagement probably for the next year, just based off estimates, because a lot of our work is between the youth and all the way up to our elders, and it's really important that we have all generations represented. Now, with all of that said, in March, I think it was like the week after March 13th, we began distributing food boxes to families across Akwesasne, and we served approximately 900 families a week for about 10 weeks. And then our follow-up project from that was about food security and making steps towards food sovereignty in Akwesasne. So we distributed 300 raised garden beds, 8 by 4 feet by 1 foot. We've developed a comprehensive education series to go with it. And then due to a partnership we have inherited 35, which is now today turned into 45 students that are helping us do these projects this summer. Care for the gardens, help educate the community. There are horticulture ambassadors. Yeah, so that's what we've been doing for community engagement.
Fantastic, Abraham. Thank you for sharing. Are there any others?
And it's occurred to me that this isn't engagement that's happened yet, but we do have, Alita and I have funding from the Ottawa Field Naturalist Club to listen for calling frogs through the summer, and especially trying to extend the known range of the mink frog, which calls. Most of the calling surveys have been focused on the early spring stuff like chorus frogs. And so we're going to try to listen at each of the bridges along the South Nation during the mink frog calling season, which would probably be starting soon if the weather stays normal or becomes normal.
Okay, great.
So that's
Great.
a community activity in the future if the weather agrees with it.
So with that, we can move on to the approval of the meeting minutes for the Joint Standing Committee meeting, which you'll find on page 4 of your agenda package. And again, we'll need a mover and seconder to approve those meeting minutes. Looking for a mover. Just a reminder, you will need to mute yourself before.
Alvin?
Thank you, Alvin. Do we have a seconder? I see Ed raised his hand, so I'm assuming Ed's seconding. Great.
Hello?
Yes, Ed. Did you have a question or just seconding?
It's Bill. Did you hear me?
Oh, Bill.
Okay,
Yes, Bill.
I was going to second, and I wasn't coming over, so I'm double checking to see that I can still get in. Am I in?
Yes, you are.
Yes.
Okay, I will make comments later. Thank you so much. Sorry about that.
No problem. Okay, so I have moved by Alvin, seconded by Ed. And if there are no questions, Mr. Chair, you can call the question for the approval.
All right. Any opposed?
Hearing none, that'll be carried. We'll move on to the meeting minutes from the Fish and Wildlife Committee meeting, and you'll find those on page 9 of your agenda package. So again, looking for a mover and seconder to approve the minutes from our March 5th meeting.
Doug Thompson, I'll move.
You, Doug? And Kirk, I see your hand go up for now. Thank you for seconding.
Yeah, second.
Perfect. Gonna lower your hands now so that you can raise them again. Perfect. All right. If there are no questions, comments, or corrections on the minutes, then Mr. Chair, you can call the question.
Are any opposed?
Hearing none, that is carried. Business arising from minutes, I didn't have anything identified. If anyone has anything, please let us know and we can address it now. Okay, hearing none, we'll move on to item 9A, and it's a presentation from staff. So give me 1 second here to swap slide decks again. And I'll turn it over to Kat and Omer. Just let me know when you want me to advance your slides.
Okay, great. Thanks, Rhonda. Hi again, everyone. It's Kat Watson here, and along with my colleague Omar Kanan, we're going to present to you some monitoring tools and decision making tools that contribute to our flood forecasting and warning program at SNC. So I guess next slide there, Rhonda. Thank you so much. So one of South Nation Conservation's top priorities is protecting people and minimizing property damage due to flooding. And our flood forecasting and warning program has many components to help achieve this. But today we're going to focus mainly on the data that's collected from the field and how this data is used to inform decisions around water levels and flows. And we'll also touch on some of the important collaborations that take place with other agencies as well as our partner municipalities and the public. So on the data side of things, to have an effective program, it's important that we have access to very specific types of environmental data as well as historical data related to the hydrologic cycle, and that we have access to computer software and models that help us store, analyze, and visualize the data. Go to the next slide there. So we collect a lot of environmental data to help us understand the hydrologic cycle within the watershed. This includes river water levels and flows, snow depth and water equivalent in the snow, precipitation, soil moisture, and groundwater levels. And all of this data contributes to our understanding of the amount of water flowing through the watershed. You can just go to the next slide there. So to do this effectively, we need to have access to accurate data. So that requires us to have quality calibrated equipment, and that equipment has to be spatially distributed across the jurisdiction. So here you can see a map of some of our stations within this jurisdiction. The purple triangles represent the gauging stations along rivers, so that collects water levels and flows. And then the green circles within the jurisdiction boundary are SNC maintained climate stations, and we also rely on data collected at environment and climate change stations within the city of Cornwall, Ottawa, and the city of Brockville as well. So all of these stations, at all of these stations, we collect several types of data. This data, to be effective, it has to be timely. So many of our sensors collect information every 15 minutes, and these stations have telemetry. So the data packages are transmitted every hour over the satellite network. And then data also has to be reliable. So we maintain these networks. We're constantly ensuring that the data is being validated and checked, and then making maintenance runs or doing repairs where needed. So go to the next slide. Actually, sorry, Rhonda, can we just go back one? I'll just make reference to the two photos. So the bottom photo, the climate station, that's a new climate station that we just actually installed within the city of Ottawa, just around the community of Bearbrook. And that was identified as a gap within our network. So we made sure to get that station in so that we could close that gap. And the top picture is of the data logger that exists at a lot of these stations, and it's a a really powerful piece of equipment that allows us to collect information from all of those different sensors I talked about, from soil moisture, precipitation, barometric pressure, temperature, etc. So it collects information from all of those sensors, stores it, and then transmits it over the satellite network. We could go to the next slide. So then, of course, when we have all of this data, we need to be able to store it and manage it properly. And SNC is part of a data management hub along with 9 other conservation authorities within Eastern Ontario. And we use a proprietary software called Water Information Systems by Kisters, also known as WSKI. And so this software is quite powerful and robust. It accepts those transmissions in near real time from the satellites, and has the capability to do automatic data transformations and calculations. And then it also has a number of data visualization tools as well. So I'm passing things on to Omar.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Omar Kanan. I'm the Water Resources Specialist here at South Nation. So all this compiled data is a valuable resource for understanding our watershed systems, but to be able to make an informed decision and influence change, this water data must be processed into hydrologic information that would suit our SNC's staff needs. So at SNC, we make sure we have the data organized and viewed in a way that the people that need this data can get this information in a well-in-time manner. So you can see in the right bottom corner, this is what we call at South Nation the daily planning cycle, or is known as the DPC. So it's an Excel spreadsheet that pulls all the data from the software management program that Kat earlier talked about, which is known as WSKI, and summarizes all the numbers and information that we need into tables. Next slide, Lorenda. So one of the way we process this data and display this hydrologic helps staff to create other tools to help us analyze the information and what's going on to the watershed. And one of the first and common ways to analyze this data is to compare current conditions to historic conditions. So when we look at historic conditions, this helps staff to create thresholds so we could be able to compare what is going on right now to anything that extreme that has happened in the past. And for example, here you could look at the pictures on the left side. This is by the St. Lawrence River in 2014. The top picture is in 2014. And when in 2017, the water levels rose to historic levels, we can see this is the same exact area, but just different situation. Next slide. So with technology evolving, we're able to use software that helps us gather multiple input components, such as the weather forecast, current water levels, and different watershed characteristics. So at South Nation, we have what we call the HydraJuice model that helps us predict flow rates at specific gauges within the South Nation River watershed. Tools such as this gives us confidence when we want to make an informed decision and kind of communicate to the public what we're seeing within the watershed. Next slide. So right here is an example of the HydraJuice model's results. So right here is the map of the South Nation River watershed, and it shows you where all the stations within the watershed are. And on the right side top corner, it's showing us the results for Bear Brook. So what the graph is showing is 4 different lines. So we have the observed line in green, the yellow line, which is the 95th percentile, the red line, the median, and the orange line, which is the 10th percentile. So what we have seen in the past or observed when we're using the HydraJuice, the observed value tends to follow different scenarios depending on the watershed conditions. So if we are, for example, in the spring freshet, it usually follows the 90th percentile due to the snow on the ground and ice on the ground, so everything runs off faster. And during low water events, it usually follows the 10th percentile. And so with combining this technology with actually looking at creating these thresholds from historical data, we're able to, as you can see in the bottom right corner, we can create thresholds and put them into our warning system. So what we have done is every time the model predicts a water level that is higher than the threshold, it sends an alarm system to the flood forecasting and warning team, allowing them to give us more time to kind of inform the public of the situation in the watershed. Next slide. So as Sandra mentioned before, the SNC jurisdiction is situated between two other systems, the Ottawa River and the St. Lawrence River. Both the Ottawa River watershed and the St. Lawrence River watershed are huge watersheds. So in these cases, we have gauges to help us keep an eye on the water levels that border the South Nation jurisdiction from both the Ottawa River and the St. Lawrence River, but we also rely on other agencies for sources of information. So agencies such as the Ottawa River Regulations Board and the Lake Ontario St. Lawrence River Board help us provide CAs, not just South Nation, but other CAs as well, with each of the respective water courses conditions, and sometimes they explain what are the potential consequences for the upcoming weather forecasts. Next slide. So it's very important for South Nation staff to be able to convey this information to our member municipality and partners, as well as the public. That's why we make sure we have, every year at South Nation, we make sure we have the flood forecasting and warning workshop earlier in the year to showcase the work that we do and how you can access this information and how to understand this information that South Nation provides to our partners. Also, we have, during any type of event, we appoint on-call duty officers that can answer any questions or concerns during the spring freshet or any other event. As well as South Nation Conservation's communication department makes sure that the information that we are trying to convey is put out into the public in press releases. Next slide. Just to also point out something for anyone who's just also curious about water levels in general in our jurisdiction, all of that information can be accessed online on the South Nation website. So just to kind of conclude and summarize everything, the monitoring network is our eyes and ears of the watershed. So the more gauges we put in, the more we take care of our gauges, the better we understand the watershed, and the more informed decisions the better informed decisions we'd be able to make. So definitely the need for the monitoring is important for the flood forecasting and warning program, as well as other programs, and to the public as well. So you could always, people who are always interested in kayaking or just to know what the water levels are, it's important to have that information out there.
Great, thank you, Omer and Kat. Are there any questions on that presentation for either Kat or Omer?
Well, I'll just say that that the whiskey results of water level, I haven't used the South Nation pages, but for the Kempville Creek, for our Mud Puppy Night in Oxford Mills, I just sort of discovered the RVCA's hourly updates of the water level, and it's been very informative to see how the individual weather events affect the flow in the creek. And we're going to be looking at that for the South Nation tributaries for our mussel work this summer.
And I see we have a question from Abe. Go ahead, Abe.
Hi. I was looking at your basin, and it doesn't appear that Cornwall is a part of your watershed. But I was intrigued by that, and I wanted to sort of see, is there sort of a similar setup within the basin that I guess, Cornwall and Akwesasne existed. And who would those contacts be, or is this sort of your own independent thingy? And then the sort of next thing is like, how much do these climate stations cost? Yeah, and so that was just the beginning.
Do you, Omar? Did you, okay, I can field the climate station question. So again, it kind of depends on what type of information you want to collect. If we're dealing with a station that has soil moisture, all-weather precipitation, so it does both rain and snow, as well as temperature, barometric pressure. So if it has several sensors going into one of those data loggers and is telemetered, so you can transmit that data hourly, those run about around 20,000 actually. And because it is very accurate, or the equipment deployed there is very accurate and specialized.
Thank you.
Omer or
then,
Sandra,
yeah.
do you want to take the other part of the question?
Abe, if you can, I'm sorry, if you can repeat just the first part, because my internet is cutting in and out, and then I just kind of didn't get the full question. Sorry about that.
So I was looking at your map of your watershed, and I didn't see that like Cornwall or Akwesasne was actually a part of your watershed. So I was interested in how that station in Cornwall actually complements your data, and it sort of inspired this additional question about, so do the IJC regulations on water levels affect your watershed?
So it does not affect the South Nation watershed in particular, but it does affect the South Nation jurisdiction by the St. Lawrence. And the reason why we use the climate station at Cornwall is because we mostly use the climate station in Cornwall for low water purposes and to look at the precipitation levels and kind of get more information about the precipitation in the area. So we look at the precipitation data in Cornwall, Brockville, and the city of Ottawa, as well as our own gauges, and kind of come up with a statistical analysis for that. So we kind of try to get as much area coverage as possible, even though Cornwall is not technically in our watershed, but the area and the characteristics of the area are very similar. And as for the information about like IJC, we get IJC's help. Specifically, like Environment Canada tells us what the water levels might be like upstream, like in Lake Ontario, upstream of the Iroquois Dam, and downstream of the Iroquois Dam to Moses Saunders.
Mm-hmm. All right, I really appreciate that. Sounds like we need that in our watershed here. And yeah, so I would love to like see some more details on the model of what sort of what is the sort of statistical analysis that or like sort of statistical strategy you're using to model this. Yeah, is it like sort of Bayes theory?
So for precipitation, specifically, if like we're talking about the climate stations, is that what your question is about the climate stations in particular, or are you talking about the hydrogeosphere model?
The hydrogeosphere model.
Okay, so the hydrogeosphere model, I'm gonna just talk briefly about it, just because I'm not I'm not the expert within South Nation. We have Michael OBrien that usually deals with this, who is a hydrogeologist at South Nation. But so basically, the components are with the collaborations with the Quanti. The components would be whatever is coming in from Environment Canada's weather forecast and the current watershed conditions. So everything from soil moisture to actual elevations to what the water levels are currently are, and what the soil characteristics within the watershed are. All of that goes into the software that they've created, taking into account what the weather forecast is. And again, our model predictions is accurate as the weather forecast. So that is key. And we know how sometimes the weather forecast is not as predicted, but all those components together give out what the flows are predicted to be.
All right. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate your answers, and I would love to get in contact with Mulaney as well.
Oh, for sure.
We can make that happen for you, Abe, offline. So I've made a note of that.
Thank you so much.
Are there any additional questions?
Can you hear me now,
Yes, I
Rhonda?
can, Bill. Go ahead.
Okay. I just wanted to say that I thought the report was very, very thorough and well presented, and I think it's very difficult to present a report like that when all of us are listening in various different ways. So well done, and thank you.
Thank you
Thank you very much.
If there are no additional questions, I'll ask for a mover and seconder to receive and file the presentation.
Alvin?
Thank you, Alvin. And a seconder?
I'll second.
That was Abe. Thank you. You can go ahead with your question, Mr. Chair.
All right. Are there any opposed?
Hearing none, we'll receive and file that presentation. Thank you very much, Kat and Omer. Just going to switch slide decks again. And we will move on to item 9B, OPG Regional Biodiversity Program. Michelle, pages 16 and 17.
Thank you. So the report is about our next installment of the Ontario Power Generation Regional Biodiversity Program. So we were successful again at receiving funding from OPG for another 3-year project. We received $200,000 split over the 3 years. And it was a combined project under their lakes and rivers section as well as their woodlands section. So we have kind of 2 components of the project that we're going to be following through on. So the lakes and rivers section is happening at the J. Henry Tweed Conservation Area. And this is basically a continuation of the work that we did under our previous OPG program, which consists of shoreline erosion repair, riparian planting, some improvements for in-stream biodiversity, and hazard tree removals. So that's going to be happening at J. Henry Tweed Conservation Area. Specifically for 2020, a lot of the work we're doing is kind of some field assessments. We're looking at past erosion control projects to see how they're doing, whether we need to make any modifications or improvements. We're going to be doing also some surveying of hazard trees, as well as areas along one of a tributary in the park. In terms of in-stream woody debris, there's some areas that are where there's too much debris. I mean, a little bit is good. We want some, but there's areas where there's too much. So that'll be looked at. We're going to be doing a survey as well of the property, just to make sure that we have all the work is done, you know, per the boundary areas. And obviously, communications is a big part of it because it's a very, very heavily used park. So we have already some temporary project signage in the works. We're going to have updates to council and local groups, as well as you know, regular updates on social media and that sort of thing. And then the woodlands component is happening on 2 SNC properties: the Gamble property in the city of Ottawa and the Garlandside Road property, also in the city of Ottawa. For the Gamble property, we're using some drone-acquired low-level aerial photography that we acquired last year to look at plotting out some control locations on the property in terms of invasive species, so buckthorn, as well as removing ash. There's a lot. That property is you know, it's majority of it is ash trees, and you can see on the photos it's very, very heavily infested with the emerald ash borer. So we're going to be removing all the dead ash in these control locations and removing the buckthorn, treating it with a herbicide directly to the stump, and then doing some underplanting of alternative native species to try and create these satellite plantings, these pockets where we would eventually have a good seed source for some other species to come in, and we'll be continuing to control the buckthorn in those locations. So for 2020, some of the initial work is going to be figuring out those sites where we're going to do that control work, laying out those plots. We need to do a little bit of work on the access to the properties in terms of improving access. And then looking at the management and stewardship plans for the properties, making sure everything's up to date and included in there. And then some of the items we had included as well in our initial proposal were we had thought of doing some nesting boxes and hen houses specifically for the Gamble property. Initially, we thought to do that with volunteers. Obviously, with COVID, we are going to look at how we roll that out. It might be where we prepare kits and have people sign up, and if they're interested, they can pick up a kit and then drop it off once it's completed. That's one idea. So we're still kind of looking at how we're going to do that. And there's going to be some hazard tree removal, and then again, obviously, project communications for both those sites as well, just to let people know what's happening on the properties. So we're pretty excited about the work. So it'll be interesting to see how it goes on for the rest of this year, and then obviously a lot more activities will be taking place in 2021.
So what was the other property beside the Gamble property that you were doing the woodland work on?
Oh, sorry, it's the Garland Side Road property. So so that property, it's mainly a buckthorn control project. So there's a pocket of buckthorn that's become kind of established on that property where there used to be an old mill. So it was an open area, and that's where the buckthorn is. So we're looking at on that property specifically, we're going to look at controlling that within that area. So again, it'll be cutting the buckthorn and then applying the herbicide with a kind of a bingo dabber right directly to the stump. So and then the follow-up monitoring.
Mr. Chair, through you, will the underplanting be done with seedlings or some larger than seedlings?
We planned for potted stock, so that the trees we would be planting would be already a little bit bigger, so that they have a better chance to get up above any regrowth of buckthorn. So potted stock for sure.
And I have a question from Kirk. You're still muted, Kirk. You'll need to unmute.
I'm not sure if I'm asking the right person, but you had mentioned the ash trees and the dying off the ash trees. At I think it was the last meeting we had, there was someone there that mentioned that microscopic wasps, or the 1 millimeter wasp were released in several locations around the jurisdiction. And I was just wondering if you or someone there had an update on if that's moved ahead, if there's been any results from the release, or is it too early to tell yet? Thanks.
I can start answering that question, then probably what I'll do is connect you with Chris Craig from our office, who is our forest tech that was working on that project. So we did do releases for 2 years in a row. And then last year, we worked on going back to some of their sites. They actually did cut some of the ash trees in the area and took samples. So the goal is to see whether or not the population is self-sustaining and multiplying in those areas that they were released. So that has been done. I don't know if we've actually received any information back on those results, but I will have Chris Craig connect with you from our office. He can give you a more detailed update on that project.
Okay, thank you.
And these initial releases of the biocontrol organisms, they often take a while to get established and see how effective they're going to be.
Okay, are there any additional questions for Michelle?
There's one question is, what's the name of the stream that goes through the J. Henry Tweed Conservation Area?
So
and shouldn't we have a name for all the streams in the watershed?
Yes, naming of streams comes up every time for projects and it's definitely a gap in kind of the area for water courses. So through the park, it's a natural water course and it doesn't have a name. But upstream, it's called the Little and Cherry Municipal Drain. So whether we want to call it Little and Cherry Creek is, that's an option, I guess. Or maybe whether some of the people who've been living there for a while, maybe they've been calling it something, and we don't know yet. So that's something we could look at figuring out too.
I see a question from Abe. Go ahead, Abraham.
Hi. I feel like some of your staff at South Nation received this paper, but about emergent molecular evolution among ash species resistant to the emerald ash borer. Is there any sort of potential to be exploring options like that?
It's probably gone to Chris. It's probably a Chris question, Abe.
Well,
No.
thank you so much.
Sorry, can't answer that one for you on the fly. I'll mention to Chris you're interested and have him connect with you as well.
It's just that
Supplementary to that question, it's Bill. We had different areas. We were releasing that mini wasp that was going to lay eggs on the ash beetle larva. Have we had any update on that? Is that still ongoing, or is there anything to go along with that?
So, Bill, that was the question that Kirk was asking as well. So I do know that they came in and took some samples from ash trees on those sites to see if the population is still self-sustaining and multiplying. I don't know if we've had those results come back in yet, but I'm going to have Chris follow up and I can get back to you as well on that one. I'll have Chris give an update for us.
Thank you.
And the business about these genes in ashes that make them resistant to the ash borer, that's going to have to presumably take genetically modified, develop genetically modified stock in each species, like they've done with the American chestnut. And so that's going to be a very long, slow process before anybody's going to be able to plant resistant ashes.
And sort of on that topic, Mr. Chair, many years ago, 50, 60, we lost almost all of our elms. And I note around the countryside now that there are elms regenerating, but many of them don't last longer than 30 or 40 years. Has anyone else observed that, and has there been any comment from anyone on that?
Well, my observation on that is that what we're seeing now is either the partly resistant or the unresistant progeny of the first generation of trees after the Dutch elm disease went through, and the ones that are vulnerable are dying now, and so we're probably looking for another generation before elms are mostly resistant to the Dutch elm disease.
One advantage is that they actually do get old enough to produce seed before they die. So these young ones are able to reproduce.
Okay, so I've made a note because I'm hearing a lot of interest in the emerald ash borer and in particular the WASP research project. So I've made a note to maybe bring that back on the September agenda, either as a slide or a report, so that we can share the update and results with everyone. In the meantime, Kirk, Bill, and Abe, I'll have Chris contact you before then to give you a bit of a sneak peek on results. But we'll bring something back to the September meeting for the group.
Now,
thank you.
Any other questions for Michelle?
Yeah, I'll make one remark that, I've been talking about mussels. There's another kind of mollusk that should have some attention paid to it in the forests, and those are land snails. And we don't have anywhere near the abundance of land snails they do, 150 miles south of here, or in southwestern Ontario. But if people who are working in the forest were to pick up land snail shells and bring them around, I could look at them, and we could have some idea what species there are. There's one record of what's perhaps the rarest land snail in Canada from the Leitrim wetlands from 1997. And the COSIWIC report on that is being written now. And one of the things Alita and I are trying to do this year is to get around to places and see if we could find this. This is Neohelix dentifera. And it's the kind of snail for which it's the largest land snail, native land snail in Ontario. And there's about 5 records for the province. So that gives you an idea how rare it is.
Well, we're planning work in the Leitrim wetland probably this year as well, just to check on work we've done in the past. So we'll make sure to keep our eyes open for that, and we'll collect any shells that we find for you to identify for sure.
Also, the Anguispira really is kind of spotty, and it's very, very widespread in southwestern Ontario. And I'm surprised with all the limestone there is here that there's not more Anguispira, and I'm not quite sure why. So that would be another one to look for, and it's very It's easy to spot because it's fairly large and it has a kind of a tweed pattern all around it. They call it the snake spiral, Angospira. So that's also a shell of interest. It's not a species at risk, but it's something that is noticeable, easily noticeable. A lot of other land snails are really too tiny for most people to keep track of.
It's Bill. I think the comments you're making on land snails are excellent because I think many people are like me. You assume that the only snails around were the ones you saw in the water. And knowing and recognizing there are others we should be watching for is really important.
We'll draw up we wrote a book about this. We'll draw up a sheet and send it around about the larger land snails in this area.
Thank you.
Great. With that, we'll go to the recommendation on page 16. The Fish and Wildlife Committee receive and file the OPG Regional Biodiversity Program update. Looking for a mover and a seconder.
Alvin.
Thank you, Alvin. Seconded by Ed Fields. Thank you, Ed. Mr. Chair, you can go ahead with the question.
Are there any opposed?
Hearing none, that is carried. Moving on to catchment studies update from Kat on page 18 of your package.
Hello again, everyone. So this report accompanies the slide that I presented on catchment studies in the staff update. And as a recap, just as a quick recap here, we undertake monitoring initiatives at a catchment level to support the subwatershed planning process at the City of Ottawa. And we currently have 2 studies underway right now, funded through the Eastern Ontario Water Resources Program and in partnership with the City of Ottawa. One on we're just wrapping up our study on the North Castor catchment. So baseline data was collected in 2018 and 2019, and we're wrapping up the final report on that catchment to include recommendations for future rehabilitation and protection, as well as a summary of past restoration projects completed within the catchment by SNC. And then we have our South Bear Brook catchment, which we've just started basically this field season. It'll be a 2-year study occurring in 2020 and 2021. And it'll include the collection of baseline data to support characterization of the catchment, including water quality, temperature surveys, so that we can assess thermal regimes within the catchment, the collection of biological communities such as invertebrates and fish, HDF delineation, headwater drainage feature delineation, some base flow measurements, and in terms of reporting back to the Fish and Wildlife Committee, we, as soon as, I guess at the next meeting, perhaps we can bring our findings from the North Castor catchment, and then at the end of the year, we can bring back the monitoring activities completed on South Bear Brook.
Thank you, Kat. Are there any questions for Kat on that report? Seeing none, we'll need a mover and seconder for the recommendation on page 18. The Fish and Wildlife Committee receive and file the catchment study update. Looking for a mover and a seconder. Malcolm, thank you.
Doug Thompson, move it.
Doug, I got you a seconder. Malcolm beat you to the move.
Okay. No, that's fine. He's always ahead of me.
And you can go ahead with the question, Mr. Chair.
Are there any opposed?
Hearing none, we are carried on that item as well. Moving on to item D, the monitoring update from Michelle on page 20 to 22 of your agenda package.
Thank you. So this is just an outline of some of the monitoring activities that we either typically do in a year or are that are a result of a special program or project. A lot of projects we do every year require data collection, data analysis, and then reporting on that. We typically begin in the spring once the snow on the majority of the snow on the landscape has melted and water courses are ice free. So something like the headwater drainage features that Ryan mentioned in the slideshow update would be one of the first activities that we do in the spring. So obviously some of this work's been impacted this year by the COVID-19 pandemic. So we've developed, and Rhonda actually worked a lot on this, very hard, standard operating procedures to specifically address protecting the staff and the public while we're out completing this field work. So the procedures include things like, staff don't travel together in vehicles anymore. Everyone has their own personal protective equipment that's assigned directly to them. We don't share equipment, all that sort of stuff. Social distancing, keeping apart from people. So we've built all that into these standard operating procedures for our field work to try and still be able to complete this important work while keeping everybody safe. So like Ryan mentioned, sorry,
I broke in. You should tell the Canadian Museum of Nature that some of this is possible. They've completely closed down all of their research.
Yeah, different agencies have taken different stands, and even even conservation authorities have everyone's done things a little bit differently depending on the conservation authority. So it's not the same across the board, that's for sure. So in terms of the headwater drainage features, like Ryan mentioned, we had planned to collect at least 30 assessments on features, but unfortunately, like you said, we couldn't do it. We tried. We had procedures in place, but where the sites were located and the size of the sites, we weren't able to do it safely with all the requirements in place. So we do have the option to hold off on that and add that work basically to next spring. So that's our plan right now. We're gonna complete that work next spring. So it was unfortunate, but I mean it'll be all right in terms of the information that we'll collect. It'll still be useful data, and it won't be a problem having it done next spring. In terms of biological community sampling, fish sampling is planned for the summer as part of the South Bearbrook catchment study that Kat mentioned. And the planned methodology that we're going to use was trap nets, which actually works out pretty well in our favor because it's easier to keep that 2-meter physical distance when we're setting trap nets as opposed to electrofishing. It's when you're electrofishing, you can't be 2 meters apart, or you're going to end up missing all your fish. So the fact that we were planning to use trap netting worked out well for us in this instance. So that's we're planning to move ahead with that, obviously with following the standard operating procedure. And then benthic invertebrate sampling, we are still planning to do that. It occurs annually in the fall, so we're hoping by then maybe some of the situation has gotten a little bit better. We'll see. But again, it's a little bit easier to do that work while staying the 2 meters apart from other workers. So it does require 2 staff because we're working in the water, but we can easily separate for that work. So we aren't anticipating any issues completing that sampling this fall. In terms of water quality sampling, the Provincial Water Quality Monitoring Network, that's our long-standing water quality monitoring program that we partner with the Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks. It typically runs from around April to November. We collect water samples monthly from 14 stations in the watershed, and we send it to the ministry to their lab for analysis. So this program is currently on hold because the ministry lab is closed due to the pandemic. So we're just waiting to hear that the lab opens up again, and then we'll start up that program. So unfortunately, there will be some gaps in the data for the spring time frame and up until the point when the lab opens again. So there's not much we can do there, but we're just keeping an eye on when the lab opens again. And then another water quality sampling that we do is through special levy from the City of Ottawa. It's 12 locations within the city. It's part of their, the city used to do this work under their baseline monitoring program, and the 3 CAs within the city took it over for the past couple of years. Again, we are anticipating we'll be able to do this program. It's just been modified a little bit. The city, because of financial constraints, they've reduced the special levy a little bit. So instead of starting, in April or May, we're now starting in July with the first sample collection event. So instead of a 9-month program, we're down to a 6-month program. But it's again, it'll be possible to complete the work. We're not anticipating any issues doing that. So we're looking forward to starting that in July.
Is this water quality?
Yes, so we take grab samples and submit it to the City of Ottawa lab, and they do a complete analysis on it.
Right.
Yeah, and that information we use as well in our catchment study. So it's important information we want to still collect. So, and then the last one I have in the report there is the City Stream Watch. So this is a volunteer-based program, and it basically involves walking a length of watercourse, and you record morphological characteristics of the watercourse. We identify areas in need of stewardship activities, whether that be erosion control, riparian buffer plantings, that sort of stuff. All work with outside volunteers has been postponed for now, so we're looking at this program and at specifically what data we collect to see what we could do ourselves so that we could still collect some of the meaningful information while adhering to any of the procedures in terms of distancing and all that stuff. So we're hoping to still be able to do some of the work because it is valuable information, especially the areas where we identify stewardship opportunities. So we're just looking at what data we want to collect this year and how we're going to go about doing that. So we're anticipating hopefully to start that work in July in terms of actual on the ground monitoring. And then other planned monitoring activities that we're looking at doing include some survival assessments of past planting projects, and that's fairly straightforward work. It's a single staff person could complete that, so it's a little bit easier to get done. We have some groundwater well maintenance to do, as well as manual water level readings. Again, it's a single staff person job, so fairly straightforward, and we don't anticipate any issues with that. And then also some invasive species distribution mapping on our SNC properties. And this ties in a little bit to the Ontario Power Generation Project, especially the Garland Side Road property. We want to get a really good idea of the actual distribution of buckthorn on that property. So we'll have staff go out and actually, GPS the perimeter basically, and then any outliers on that property. And again, it's a single person activity, and they can easily be completed while adhering to the standard operating procedures. So yeah, that's just a snapshot of what we're planning and what's kind of been impacted a little bit by the COVID-19 pandemic.
Thank you. Questions for Michelle?
Well, I think that you're doing a really courageous and dedicated effort here, and instead of just hunkering down and saying we won't do anything until after COVID-19. So I think you can be applauded for continuing with doing as much monitoring as possible.
Thank you, Alita.
Any other questions for Michelle? Seeing none, we'll go to the recommendation on page 20. Be looking for a mover and seconder for the recommendation. The Fish and Wildlife Committee receive and file the 2020 monitoring update. Mover.
Alvin.
Thank you, Alvin. And looking for a seconder. Thank you, Kirk. Go ahead, Mr. Chair.
Are there any opposed?
Hearing none, that is carried. And brings us to item 10, supplemental, which we do not have one. So we can move on to the monitoring report roundtable. Mr. Chair, would you like to start us off on this one?
Oh, you mean what have we observed in the?
Yes. Do you want me to share the document you emailed? I can bring that up on screen if that's helpful.
Yeah, you could. Everybody can fill it out.
Second here.
But I'm not sure how well it can show.
Wait a second. I just gotta find you. There we go. So hopefully you can see that.
Okay, so here's the document. It's the same as it usually is, only with little sort of instigations based on the way the season has gone. One of the things that we've noticed in going after chorus frogs and trying to listen for other frogs is that we've had this incredible lapse in spring. We had on the 12th of April, we had toads calling, and then we didn't hear toads again until this recent warm spell at the end of May. So it's been a very interrupted spring, and there's probably a lot of plants and animals whose progress in spring has been affected by this. And so if anybody's noticed that kind of thing, it would be interesting to see. You can see under purple loosestrife there, as everybody knows, these Galeriacella beetles have been introduced that in 2005 that clobbered purple loosestrife, which had been the poster child for invasive species all through the 80s and 90s. And now purple loosestrife is just a wildflower because these beetles keep it under control. And the ones I've seen this year have been really, really very chewed up. And if you find little sprouts of purple loosestrife, you can see that there's holes all through them. The interesting thing is that in 2017, after we had the 2016 drought, there was also early at this time of year, there was an awful lot of what we call perforations, where the beetles have eaten holes in the leaves. And then it started to rain, and it rained all year, and it apparently washed the beetles and the larvae off of the purple loosestrife, and it took off. And everybody noticed in 2017 that there was lots of loosestrife around. So that's one thing people can notice is the fact that the little loosestrife plants now, at least in the ones we've seen, have been pretty well chewed up. And another thing is this, these mystery snails, the big mystery snails that I talked about at the last meeting. If anybody gets to Cass Bridge, which is downstream of the stream that has them in it, near Winchester Springs, like Hess Brook, if anybody finds any big black shells at Cass Bridge, that will be an indication that the mystery snails have gotten into the main river, and that's something we've sort of been looking for. But as I said, we've hardly been in the South Nation drainage for this spring, so we don't have any direct local observation.
So are there anyone, we can maybe go around the table and find out what people have noticed about this spring and about relative abundances of the different kinds of creatures you notice?
As you go around, when you get to the end, I'd like the opportunity, Mr. Chair, to make some final comments.
Okay, I can roll call from my end, and if you have anything to add, just unmute yourself. Abraham?
In Akwesasne, I feel like it's been really cold. That we might even have a frost this coming week, or like tonight actually, which kind of messes with our effort to do gardening. But I don't know if that's relevant.
Work closed. So you're not back at City Hall yet.
I'm hearing someone needs to mute if they're not speaking. Sorry, Abraham, go ahead. I'm just muting some lines.
Okay, and we have seen a bear in Akwesasne. I mean, that's really uncommon for us here. So I find that quite intriguing. That a black bear showed up in Akwesasne. Yeah, so I haven't really noticed any other species that are hyper present. But yeah, that's all I have.
Thank you, Abraham. Alvin, I did mute you, so you'll need to unmute.
Sure. I would want to say that mentioning about the ash trees, well, there are no ash trees left here in Russell. They're all gone. And anyway, and I also would like to mention it has nothing to do about nature except for the fact that Alita and Fred winning that prize. That's a number one thing of my good news for the spring was to hear that. And I'm sure there's a lot of happy clams out there to hear he got that. So that's all I've got to say.
Thank you, Alvin.
I kind of miss having a meeting where I see everybody, but I'm sure everybody knows who I would talk to anyway. Anyway, have a good day, guys.
Kirk, I see your hand up. Did you want to go ahead?
Yeah, I guess a couple of things. One, I'd asked a question on the ash because we're losing virtually all of our ash trees and our elm trees, which we have quite a few of. We noticed this year a lot of foxes around, and we do have a burrow in our property here now with 5 kit in it, and the mother or father, whoever it is feeding them regular. They've significantly cleaned out the squirrel populations, the black squirrels, and that we were overrun with them, but there's fewer and fewer. Another thing we noticed this spring is a lot more waterfowl, a lot more ducks, wood ducks, mallards, geese, pretty regular, I think, compared to other years. And we did have a moose in our driveway in early winter, which is not super unusual. We're just beside Jessup's Falls, but it's surprising to come through the yard. So lots of wildlife, lots of stuff around in this spring, especially, like I say, waterfowls, foxes, that kind of thing. That's all I have.
Thank you, Kirk.
We've been seeing foxes too.
Next on my list is Bruce. Bruce, did you have anything you wanted to add? You are muted, so you would need to unmute if you would like to add any comments. Bruce, your video is a little bit slow, so I'm going to come back to you just in case you're having a connection issue. Ed Fields, anything to add? Again, you are muted, so if you'd like to add anything, you'll need to unmute first. I'm not hearing anything from Ed, so I'll go on to Larry.
This spring I found frogs exactly the way you did, Fred. They were really hot there in that little warm spell, and then they died off. And I heard mink frogs a lot. I didn't spend as much time at daylight in South Nation Conservation. A lot of my stuff was north of Kempville. I also bumped into 6 different black bears. I found the bird life absolutely dynamic this year. I'm not sure I can remember a year that it was this dynamic, but it was quite spectacular all spring. That's about all I have to add.
Thank you. Malcolm, you're next on my list.
Yeah, I wonder if Kirk could send his foxes over to Vernon for the squirrels and chipmunks, but be selective though, because we're finally seeing some rabbits, and we even had a groundhog, which in 30 years I haven't seen a groundhog in this area. So there's some wildlife out there, but very selective. And that's about all.
Okay, I'm gonna go. I can't tell who you're on the phone line again. I think it's Doug. Up next, Doug Clover. Again, you're muted, so those on the phone, *6 will unmute you if you have anything to add.
Hi, it's Doug Culver. I was just going to say, I've noticed, like Fred was talking about, a real decrease of purple loosestrife. I just had a little bit at the back of my property there in South Mountain along the river edge. But in the last 15 years, it's probably shrunk by about 80%. And other than that, I'm probably one of the fortunate ones that still have several living ash trees on my property there. But I think primarily, like Larry was saying, I haven't heard a lot of amphibians this year, but the bird life is just astounding, and the amount of nests I encounter and the varieties and species of birds that are around this year is better than I can ever remember since I moved here about 20 years ago. And that's it for me.
Okay, thank you. Bill, you're up next. Bill, you are muted, so you'll need to star 6. Are you there, Bill? Okay, we'll come back to you, Bill. Next on my list is Sean. Again,
yes, I'd just like to add. Oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead. I was just going to say you're muted.
I'd just like to add that I saw a lot of ticks this year. I got quite a few off of my bear that I got off of me, and just I took a walk in Forêt La Rose. I think it was in March, and we saw a moose. It's kind of acting weirdly, and as we approached it, we saw a bunch of blood on the ground. There's a bunch of big ticks. I guess they were feeding off of them all winter, just on the ground, and that's it.
Thank you. Doug Thompson, do you have anything you'd like to add? Doug, you are muted too, so it would be star 6 if you have anything to add. Okay, I'm just going to go check one more time with Bill. Oh, go ahead.
I thought I could just, on my phone, I thought that I'm muted, but I can't unmute myself just touching that. Is that? I thought I could.
It depends on the phone, but star 6 will mute and unmute you.
Anyway, we live in a subdivision in Greeley, and we had a fox little fox run up on our deck this morning. Never saw it before. 2 owls sitting up in the tree about 9 o'clock this morning. Quite something to see. We have lots of squirrels and black and red squirrels. So if anybody wants some, we have lots that people can take free of charge.
Thank you, Doug.
That's it.
So who was that?
That was Doug Thompson. And I'm just going to check with a few others that we didn't get to hear from. Bill, I don't know if you had anything to add. Okay, I'm not hearing anything from Bill. I just wanted to double check once again with Bruce. We missed you earlier. If you had anything to add, you're muted. You'll need to unmute on your screen. If you move your mouse, it should bring up the...
Rhonda, am I coming through?
You are now. I'll let you go ahead while Bruce finds his unmute button on screen.
Okay, I'm having some problem. I haven't been able to unmute for the last while using either system. But just very quickly, I'll cover 3 or 4 or half a dozen things really fast. One, for the first time in as long as I can remember, there was a black bear a half a mile north of Morban in a little bush there for 3 weeks in late March, or 2 weeks in late March. We have lots of squirrels. I have not seen groundhogs in this area for a long time. We have lots of raccoons, and there are lots of different types of ducks that I haven't seen for a while, and I don't think I've seen more of the white and the blue and the Canada geese than I have this particular year. They've been just, well, most of them are gone now, but there've been lots of them, and I'm told that a few of the Canadas farther south towards the river have already nested and are raising their young here. They've already hatched. I want to switch just a bit and say, on behalf of the board, I'd like to say sincere congratulations to Alita and Fred for the major award that they won. and they were quite humble in their comments about it. But I want to add that it's their dedication, knowledge, and their follow-through that has helped them get this award, and it's deserved. So thank you so much, and congratulations for doing the work you're doing. Next, I wanted to mention that South Nation has done many things this year, but one of the things in our area that was really appreciated was South Nation decided, through communications and other areas, that on Nurses Day
is now exiting.
They would send the trees to the nurses at the hospital, Winchester Hospital, and the Dundas Manor. And the nurses and staff and the people there really appreciated the thoughtfulness of the South Nation in sending the trees and thinking of them. And sometimes it's these tangible things that are really worthwhile. I want to also say a thank you to our staff. They've been working under lots of stress and in very different ways, having to adapt to working and planning from home, having to adapt to the different working conditions, and planning to achieve the work and the results that they have for years, and making sure they do. I'm impressed with it, and I'm thankful for them, and I know all of you join me in thanking them. And I want to thank board members, committee members today for taking the time and the effort and being so patient as we worked our way through this meeting. And once again, well done, Fred, in leading it, and with all the support you've given, Rhonda. So all of those things to say that I think a lot of good things are happening, even though we have had our challenges. So thank you to all.
Thank you, Bill. Bruce, we'll try you one more time. If you're able to find your unmute, if you had anything you wanted to add before we move on. Okay, I'm not hearing anything from Bruce. So again, a reminder to get your sheets into Fred for your monitoring. That brings us to the date of our next meeting.
Which was the 3rd of September, I think.
Yeah, so that was, I want to correct that date. So the date that's on your agenda that you received is incorrect. We normally meet on Tuesdays, so the correct date of the next meeting is Tuesday, September the 1st at 3 p.m. We'll confirm closer to that date whether it'll be a virtual meeting like today or whether the numbers have changed a bit for gatherings and we're actually able to do an in-person meeting. We're a little bit too far out to predict that at this point, so pencil in the 1st on Tuesday at 3 o'clock, and as we get closer to the date, we'll confirm if that will be in person or virtually like today.
Yeah, good setup. Open the big room up and have everybody sit 2 meters apart.
So, Mr. Chair, that brings us to the end of the agenda. If there's anything else you would like to add before we look for a mover for adjournment, I will turn it back to you.
Okay, well, I just wanted to sort of go along with Bill and say thanks to all the staff for the ingenuity and perseverance and hard work that they've been doing in dealing with the COVID situation. And
I think there should be prizes awarded amongst all of the Ontario CAs for productivity during COVID.
Yeah, but how would you evaluate it?
Oh, just by whatever they said they were doing. I'm sure that South Nation would win.
Thank you, Alita.
Should be back behind. Yeah. Well, I took it down to vegan. I got a new belt too, by the way.
All right, so with that, we are at number 14, adjournment. If there's nothing else, we will look for a mover to close our meeting for today.
Alvin.
Thank you, Alvin.
Alvin, I think you've moved everyone.
Sorry.
He's quick on the trigger. So with that, we can conclude our meeting for the day. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Thank you to anyone who was watching the broadcast online or who follows up watching the video after this meeting. Everyone have a great afternoon and stay safe, and we'll see you all again on the 1st of September.
We can all break out the popcorn and watch the video.